Good morning. Hopefully everything's working as it should be this week. So if you want to drop us a message, it looks as if my microphone is okay and everything's good now. Just wait for some comments to come through and then we will get going. It looks like we've got a few people here. So I know a few of our regulars might not be in because of they're on a course at my clinic. So I've just taken a bit of time out this morning so that I can do this. But we have a guy called Ray Allen. Yay, good. So Ray is he's a manual therapist from Canada and has come over to teach DNM. Second part of the course, so he's in the clinic at the moment, and been training up me and Dan and Al from Liverpool, so we can all start teaching the course. So we're going to be running the first DNM UK course in September. So yeah, if you fancy doing something like that, then it's just drop us a message, or you can have a look at the website. It's dnm.education, so you can have a look at that as well. But yeah, looking forward to bringing that to the UK. What else we got? We got Becky and Neil. Haven't seen you for a while, mate. Good. Finally caught up. Good. Hopefully everything made sense on the catch up. As always, if you are catching up and you got any questions, then just pop them in the Facebook group, and then I can help answer them. Hopefully, if I know it. If I don't, then I'll pass you on to someone else. So we're going to build on what we did last week, and so we had a look. Basically, took off the back of the spinal column. So spinous process is taken away, so you can see the back of the spinal cord, so that from a posterior view. And then we talked about the different coverings around the spinal cord as well. So you had that dura, which was the thick covering, and it's where epidural comes from, so upon the dura. And then you had the arachnoid layer, which was a thinner layer on the inside, a bit wispy, like a spider's web. And then the layer that wrapped, like physically attached to the spinal cord itself, the pia. So the delicate connective tissue all around the spinal cord, and then all of that then coming together with those little rootlets that came off of the cord, and you had some rootlets at the front and some rootlets at the back. So the ones at the back were the ones that detect or not detect, they don't do the detection, but they are the wires for detection in your body. So with all the sensors where they are in your skin and in your joints and in your organs, all of the time those sensors are sending information into your spinal cord, and they go into those little rootlets and then send the messages up to your brain, and then the brain works out what the hell to do with that information. And then coming down and then out the front of the spinal cord, you've got the ventral roots or the anterior roots, and those ones are motor neurons. So you've got these will go to smooth muscle, then may go to skeletal muscle for you to move and jump and run or whatever it is you want to do. But we've also got the autonomic nervous system. Well, that's part of the smooth muscle, but we've got functions like hormone secretion, which is going on all of the time and just automatically in the background, breathing and things like that. All those things, if you need to increase your blood pressure or decrease your blood pressure, all of that is going on all at the same time. So if you imagine you've got these receptors that are, let's take blood pressure for example, they're called baroreceptors. So they detect changes in pressure, so like a barometer. The only people I ever know who's got a barometer are old. My granddad had one, and I've never known anyone else to have one. But they detected pressure, so you could gauge what the weather was going to do. And we've got baroreceptors in our blood vessels, and they detect changes in volume of blood. So if you have a drop in volume, then that information will get sent to the brain, and then the brain will then um, it will either change the tonicity of the smooth muscles to decrease the size of those blood vessels, so the blood pressure increases, or it might tell the kidneys to hold on to a bit of water, because we need to pump that back into the system to bring the water levels back up. So all of this kind of stuff is going on all the time automatically. That all feeds through those networks as well. So it's we always automatically think about the skeletal system, but we've got all that automatic stuff going on too. Cool. We got Penny, morning Penny, and Julie. Good to see you all. We've got all regulars in this morning. Cool. So let's get going. That today, it's a little bit heavy, but I'm going to try and break it down into chunks, so that it makes what is a really, really complex subject hopefully a bit easier to understand. And I'll use analogies like wiring and like a house and all that kind of stuff. So like plug networks and things, because hopefully that will make it sort of stick in your mind. But it's a kind of abstract thing to think about, yeah. And with um, the things we're talking about are microscopic, so that there is no chance you can see them. It's a hypothesis about what is happening, and then all of the drawings that you see in anatomy books about what's going on, they are just simply a way to simplify that information so that we can make sense of it, and we go, right, okay, so that's what's going on. So here we go. So yeah, we looked at the gross anatomy of the spinal cord last week. We're going to have a look at the internal anatomy, so the kind of detail of the spinal cord. And if I just go back to this video, do you need your pipe cleaners? Maybe sort of in between the ears, like not just yet. You're all good. We might do later. Yeah, it depends on how well we get on. So we'll see how you go. So yeah, let's have a look at this a second. Is it that one that I need? Let me just grab up these. What was I going to have a look at? Just right. Oh yeah, that was it. Yeah, spinal cord. Yeah, let's have a look at this one. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the cord again. So this is what we looked at last week. Let's just get rid of that. There we go. Cool. Yeah. So gonna have a look at that cord. Is it this one? It might be the other one. Sorry. Let me just get the right video. I think it might be. Yeah. It's this one. Yeah. It's the top-down view, because this is what I want to. There we go. Okay. Just pause that there. It's literally this this picture that I wanted to show. So if I just grab my arrow, it's this bit. Okay, so this is the bit we're interested in today. So I mentioned it very briefly last week. I just wanted to kind of drop it in there before we cover it in a bit more detail today. But you have probably heard of white matter and grey matter within the brain. And basically that is also the same in the spinal cord. So it's basically the brain is kind of like squished then into a tube down the spinal cord. And we've got this butterfly shape of grey matter in the middle of the spinal cord. And then all around the outside, we've got white matter. Okay. So if what we were looking at last week were these little roots here. So we've got these little rootlets coming off, and then they form a nerve root. Yeah. So you've got all the little kind of branches, and then they form a root. And these branches, so that's anterior, so that would be motor, and these ones around the back are dorsal. So remember the dorsal fin from last time. So these will be sensory. So what happens is when those go into the spinal cord, if you imagine it like a very fine wire, so it's going into the cord. If it's a sensation coming in, so a receptor has detected something and it's gone, oh, so that it's reached a threshold level, enough of a stimulus to go, right, okay, let's send that message back to the brain and let the brain know that something's happening. Okay, so it goes into the spinal cord, and then through those rootlets, so through here, and then it will come into some part of the spinal cord, and then it will go up to the brain. Okay, sometimes it makes another connection and then skips up, but we don't need to worry about that right now. And in fact, for what we kind of do, so if you're in fitness industry doing therapy, you don't need to worry about that. What you need to worry about is when things go wrong. Okay, so we need to know how it works so that we can detect when it's not working. Okay, so we don't need to know the intricacies of every single interneuron and all the different communications that are happening, but we need to know what should, on the whole, happen, and then what happens if something is injured, okay, or is not working properly. There's a disease process or something like that. Okay, so we've got sensation. So something's touched your skin over here. It's gone all, imagine there's a line here, okay? It's gone all the way along here. It's then gone in through that intervertebral foramen, so on the side of the vertebra, which we've had a look at before. That sensation then travels along the nerve root, which is mixed. Remember, at that point, it's mixed. And then here in the spinal column, this is when it splits. And then it splits into sensory and comes around the back, goes somewhere in here, and then goes up to the brain. Now, depending on what the sensation is, will depend on what bit of the spinal cord it uses to send that message up. Okay, so break that down. So we've got different types of receptors, and I mentioned about baroreceptors before. They sense pressure. We've got all, for us in physical fitness and therapy, we hear a lot about something called mechanoreceptors. And mechanoreceptors detect changes in mechanical pressures. So it's like a mechanical stimulus. So this is one of the reasons why we affect the nervous system when we do manual therapy. Because when you put pressure on the skin, whether you do something really quickly and you jab someone, whether you do something really slowly, and if you've heard of it, like a myofascial release type, really slow skin stretch type technique, there are different receptors that pick up those different stimulus. And they don't all go up the same tubes. So they don't go all in the same area in the spinal cord. There are different sections for different sensations. Okay? I'll just leave that there and then we'll come back to that in a second. Okay, cool. So let's have a look at this. You can tell where we're going. Get your coffees ready. So grey and white matter. So this is a cross section of your spinal cord. So that's what we've just seen. Okay, so this is exactly what we've just seen. This has been stained. Okay, so it's easier to identify stuff. So you can see the butterfly shape of the grey matter in the middle, just there. Okay. Now, something that is a bit confusing, that it took me a bit of a while to kind of get my head around. I kind of thought, all right, okay, sensory bit is one color and the motor bit is another color, and it doesn't work like that. Okay, so just because this is grey, it doesn't mean that you receive certain signals into that grey area, and because this is white, it receives certain signals there. This coloration, so this change in color, is to do with the density of the tissues in that area, so the nerve tissue in that area. So where there are a lot of nerves and there are a lot of connections with those nerves, the matter is grey. Okay, so it goes darker because it's denser. Okay, and then on the outside, around these peripheral parts here, there aren't as many neurons as in here. Okay, so that is the only reason why these are different colors. Yeah, and most people will have exactly, obviously there's going to be variations in shape, but most people will have this kind of shape. Okay, so the grey matter is the butterfly shape, and it's divided into different horns, and this will become useful when you start studying neurological testing, because you'll hear about different areas, different diseases affecting different horns and different parts of the spinal cord. Okay, so that this is what this all is. So we've got, if we just focus on the grey part, so we've got a posterior grey horn, which is this bit here, okay? We've got a lateral grey horn, which is that bit there, and then an anterior one, which is that bit there, okay? So they've divided them into sections. There are obviously other bits that you can see on there. Not too bothered about those at the moment. They obviously contribute to some of the stuff we deal with, but these are the main things you need to focus on. Okay, so the posterior horn contains interneurons, and those are ones that they come in and they connect to something else and then they go out again. So it could be that it's a sensory nerve that comes in, it connects to an interneuron that then connects to another sensory nerve that then goes off somewhere else. Okay, so that is why there's lots of darkness in that area, because there's lots of crossing over. Okay, the anterior horn contains motor neurons, so just motor neurons, and they relate to the ventral roots. Okay, so this anterior horn here, where those rootlets come out anteriorly and form that motor rootlet and then go into the nerve root, this is where a lot of them come from. Okay, so they come from this area here. So if you have an injury or an illness that affects this part of your spinal cord, then this will affect your motor function. Okay, then we've got the lateral horn, so this bit around here. This contains autonomic neurons and are only found in the thoracic and upper lumbar regions. So they're only in that section. Okay, and we'll talk about that why that is later on down the line. So this is all your automatic stuff, your gland secretion, hormones being released, breathing, baroreceptors, all that kind of stuff. All of that is traveling down those lateral grey horns. Okay, so there are different sections for different bits. Now we can't identify in a clinic room doing testing which bit is affected. We're not actually bothered about that. We just want to know whether there is something wrong. And if someone can't move something, we tend to think, depending on what kind of course you've done, there must be a tendon injury or a muscle injury or something like that. But now, hopefully, with this information, you might think, I wonder if there's something wrong with the nerve that's actually going to that muscle, and it's a nerve problem. It's not a muscle problem. And this is the thing, you have to kind of track all the way along the line. How does that muscle move? Gets a signal from the brain, motor neuron, out nerve root, along the neuron, depending on what nerve it is, to the muscle, release of chemicals into the muscle, and then the muscle contracts. Yeah, so there are obviously things all the way along that process where things can go wrong, but we tend to think when we first start out there must be an injury to the muscle, but I just want to sow the seeds that might not be the case, and you need to have a look at some other signs to see whether there might be anything else. Okay, cool. Now, so that was the grey bit. This is the white bit, so this bit around the edge here, so where there are fewer neurons and interneurons crossing over. And we've got these things called columns. Okay, so we've got an anterior column, so one at the front, anterior here. We've got a posterior column at the back, and then we've got a lateral column on the side. Okay, so these have got these columns and the horn areas in the grey matter form something called tracts. So tracts, tract. And what they are kind of like motorways. Okay, so you've got these little roads coming into the spinal cord, and then you've got the motorway sending the information up to the brain. Okay, and depending on what the information is coming in, it will go up a different motorway. So if you think about the motorways in the UK, if you want to get from London to Leeds, I think it is, then you take the M1. Okay, so you wouldn't take the M5. Yeah, you could get there eventually, but it will take you blooming ages. So if you were going somewhere else, you would take that motorway, and that's the same thing with this. So if you've got a specific bit of information needs to get to a specific bit of the brain, it's going to use that motorway. It's going to use that tract. Okay, so you can have diseases that affect certain tracts, right? And again, this is where knowing this information helps out. I'll talk a little bit more about this probably next week. Okay, we'll kind of let this all bed in. So we've got these columns in the white matter around the outside, and then we've got the horns in the grey matter that either send or receive, or are the road network to send and receive information. So if you imagine that all the way up the spinal cord, all the way down. Okay, so these columns in the white matter, these contain specific axons, which are the long taily bits of a neuron, and they carry similar information, and they can extend the length of the spinal cord. All right, so all the way up to parts of your brain, like literally a network into certain sections of your brain, and they're called tracts. There you go. So tracts are bundles of axons in the central nervous system. Nerves are bundles of axons in the peripheral nervous system. So anything in the spinal cord and the brain is central nervous system. As soon as it comes out of that nerve root, what we saw last week, that's then peripheral, so on the outside. So central in the middle, peripheral. If you think about perimeter, around the perimeter, the periphery, then that is on the outside. Okay, so tracts are basically like the nerves we see on the outside, but these are networks in the spinal cord. Okay. The sensory tracts, so the ones that receive information from your body, they take information from the peripheral nervous system to the brain, and then motor tracts carry nerve impulses from the brain to the peripheral nervous system, which is what we were looking at before. So if I just simplify all of that, this is basically what tracts are. Okay, so you've got your brain, and this picture could be a muscle, it could be a gland, it could be a blood vessel, it could be anything. Okay, so you'll have sensory information coming from this tissue up a specific tract, depending on what the tissue is and what the sensation is. That will then go to the brain. The brain will go, haha, your blood pressure is dropping, you need to do this. And then it will send information back down the central nervous system out to the peripheral nervous system, and it will change something about how your body is operating so that it can maintain some kind of equilibrium. Okay, so this is basically how we balance all of the stuff that is going on every day in our body. Information coming in, brain kind of works out what's going on, and then the information comes out again. Now, depending on the stimulus here, and we'll talk about this down the line as well, but you've probably heard of something called a reflex. Yeah, and a reflex happened to my daughter yesterday. She burnt herself on something and really rapidly moved, and she's obviously doing this in science. She was like, that was my nervous system doing that because I moved so quickly, and if I had to rely on my hormones, it would have taken me ages. I was like, very good. So if you need to get out of danger or something is threatening, then what happens is this sensation will hit your spinal cord, and then immediately you'll have a reflex to do something and get you out of the way of danger. Okay, so this can happen really quickly. Now, in a lot of the textbooks, and I don't think it's explained very well on some courses, we think it's just that loop. So ouch, move, ouch, move, and that's it. Yeah, but the brain is involved as well. So when the signal comes in from the sensory nerve saying ouch, it will tell a motor nerve to move. So you move whichever area has been affected, so you move off it. But at the same time, there'll be an interneuron sending a message to your brain, letting your brain know what's going on. Okay, so all the time your brain, even with reflexes, is going, okay, what's happening here? And that is really important to understand, because when things go wrong with reflexes, there is something wrong with your brain or your spinal cord. Okay, and again, we'll cover that later on down the line. So in its simplicity, sensory information coming into the brain decides what to do, and then information comes back out. And obviously this happens really, really quickly. Okay, there's it's just I think it's something like 200 miles an hour, maybe 300 miles an hour, something like that. It's ridiculous. So sorry about all the text here, but this kind of hopefully makes everything make sense. Now, if you want to get this picture, it is in a book called Tortora. Well, it's by one of the authors is Tortora, and it is Anatomy and Physiology. I think it's called Anatomy and Physiology by Tortora. If you Google that, I'll put a link in the group later. But this hopefully explains everything that's going on. So if we have a look here, we've got sensory receptors. Ooh, remove the wrong thing. Sensory receptors detect a stimulus. So that's here. Yeah, so we've got these sensations, and this one is an example. It's in the skin. So we've got these sensors in the skin. It's obviously the sensation, whatever it was enough, because they're there all the time, but they have to reach a threshold level. They have to reach enough of a stimulus to be able to what we call depolarize and send the impulse along the nerve. Okay, so if it's a sensor that detects really heavy pressure and you only touch really lightly, you're not going to activate those sensors. But what it will activate is the ones that pick up the light touch. Okay, so depending on the pressure on the skin, you will activate different sensation or different receptors as long as that threshold is met. Sometimes the threshold can be altered and we have weird sensations. And that, again, we need to know about these things with things like something called allodynia, where light touch is very painful. And it shouldn't be, obviously, because it's light touch. It doesn't make sense. But you're reaching a threshold level really quickly because something is going on with the nervous system. Okay, so again, another useful bit of information to try and work out what might be happening to someone. So we've got these altered sensations here. So it's reached a threshold level, sends an impulse along here. Now, if you remember this bit, this was the dorsal root ganglion. So that was the enlarged area on the back of the nerve. Yeah, so remember that that bulbous bit, and there's quite a few interneurons around here, and they so we've got information coming in here. So this will be through the back part of the spinal cord, through those little rootlets, and then you'll come. So the next bit, two sensory neurons convey the information to the spinal nerve, and then into the posterior root, so the dorsal root. And then three main things can happen with this information. Okay, so we've got sensation coming into that part of the spinal cord, three main things happening. So we've got the sensory nerve impulses pass into the posterior column, so that's into that white matter area, and then ascends to the brain, letting your brain know what's going on. Okay, and then the next bit that can happen, the sensory nerve impulse connects with an interneuron. So those are the ones that I was talking about before. And if you notice, it's in the grey area. So we've got this interneuron here. And it's because of the interneurons in that area, it's denser. So that's why it's grey. Okay. So that connects with an interneuron and then ascends to the brain via a different sensory tract. Okay, so it depends. Well, oh no, hold on, it's going across there. Okay, so it depends on the stimulus. So you're getting one tract activated, and then it might, depending on what it is, stimulate another one as well. Okay, and then your brain has to then go, oh right, okay, it's that type of sensation. Yeah, so all of this is happening all at the same time. And then here, the sensory nerve impulse interacts with the interneuron, and that immediately activates the motor neuron to initiate a spinal reflex. So sensation in, one interneuron up that tract, another one up that one. So telling the brain what's going on, but then also at the same time, motor nerve telling you to move the muscle or whatever it is. Or down here, stimulate some kind of autonomic response. So maybe increasing your heart rate, maybe holding on to your, I think that's looks like a bladder, holding on to your wee, okay? Maybe stimulating the release of glucagon in your liver, or depending on what it is, okay? So there's lots of things that it depends what's going on. So this, in its simplicity, is what happens when a sensory neuron gets activated. Okay? I need to get some, don't I? I've only got this. I need some something like that. So that's basically what is happening whenever you touch someone. So if you're doing and there's a really cool example given the other day that I heard, where if you're touched on the skin and it's by someone you know and they're doing a treatment for you and it's a nice kind of stroke on the arm and it feels good, yeah. If you're walking down an alleyway and you didn't realize that someone was there and someone strokes your arm in exactly the same way, that will freak you out because it's not expected, yeah. And so the same touch can elicit different responses depending on the context of everything as well. So and that is all to do with these going up to the brain, because your brain is interpreting where you are and going, well, bloomin' heck, last time I was in an alleyway I never got touched like this is a bit weird, and so it makes you freak out. And so the environment you're in and what is happening to you can affect the interpretation of exactly the same stimulus, right? And that's just fascinating, I think. Okay, cool. So that's the little network, and that will be really useful when we come to have a look at reflexes. Okay, let's have a look at this then. So we've got this stuff, we can't really show you any videos. The only video we've got is that first one at the beginning, where it shows you the cross-sectional area, because this micro anatomy, it's you'd have to have a look under a microscope. There aren't, and then the microscopic pictures just don't make sense because it's really hard to get your head around. So yeah, sorry, this is the best way to do it, I'm afraid. So this is really interesting. Okay, so areas of grey matter are largest in the cervical and lumbar regions because these areas are responsible for the sensation and motor response of the limbs. So if you think about it, it makes sense. So you've got motor nerves coming down from your through your spinal cord from the brain, going to your arms, and then you've got sensation coming back from your arms up that part of your spinal cord. Around your rib cage, there aren't very many muscles. Yeah, obviously organs there, but the amount of nerve tissue that you need in that area is much less. But then when you get to the legs and you've got all the branches of the motor nerves coming off the legs into the lumbars, from the lumbars, and then the sensation from the legs coming back in, you're going to need a bigger part or bigger pathways, okay, to receive that information and send the information. So the structure of the spinal cord will differ depending on where it is in the spine. Okay, so if you have a look up here, this is your cervical region, and then this is the lumbar region. But in the thoracics, it's a little bit piddly. Okay, it's very, very different. So it will be different because of where it is, and that, yeah, just makes sense. So as the spinal cord ascends, the amount of white matter increases. Okay, so if you have a look here, there's loads of white matter in the cervicals, not very much in the lumbars and the sacral region. Okay, and that's because this is due to the lower part of the cord only receiving axons from the lower body. Makes sense. So sensory information coming in from your feet will come into the lumbars, and then as it goes up through the cord, it will join the sensory information from your arms. Yeah, so the sensory information from your arms isn't going to go all the way down and then back up again. So you're going to have loads of that kind of white matter and the all of the information coming back in, but you're not going to have that in the lumbars. Okay, so that's why it is the way it is. Yeah, so as the cord ascends, more and more axons are added to the sensory tracts, and that's why that area in the cervicals is a lot bigger. So this is another issue, because if we have an injury high, then it's going to affect the information coming in from everywhere, but also the motor tracks going everywhere as well, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. So with those neck injuries that you see. Cool. So again, yeah, L1, L2, yes, yeah. So that would be the kind of remnants of the original sacral region. Yeah. So yeah, that's good. Yeah, well spotted. Yeah. So if we go back here, that kind of sacral area, so that would be related to the kind of sacral segments at that L1, L2 area. So the conus. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, well done. Well spotted. I'll put that in on the next one. So spinal nerves, detailed anatomy. Right then, so we've had that. This is just kind of breaking things down again. So what I've tried to do is just block everything into different areas. So we've seen this cross section before. So we've got the dorsal root, the sensory root. So this is information coming in. We've got the dorsal root ganglion. So that's the bulbous part of that sensory nerve. We've got sensory neurons coming in somatic, which is to do with the muscles coming in there. We've got visceral sensory neurons coming in through there. It's going to do one. And then we've got the ventral root, so the motor part, which is this part of the spinal cord, and this is the motor coming out. So we've got visceral motor neurons coming out, and then somatic to do with the muscles coming out as well. Okay, so hopefully again that kind of makes things a little bit easier. So if we have a look here, this bit here is purely sensory, this bit here is purely motor, and then as it joins together here, it's then the spinal nerve is then mixed. And Sarah, you asked a question about the articular branches. So as this comes out and then goes down the leg or the arm or wherever it's going to, there will be specific sensory branches that will go off and become the articular branches for the sensation of a joint. Okay, so it's kind of like motorway. So this will be the main motorway with all of the traffic coming up and down, and then there'll be an articular branch which will be a little A road coming off of it, going towards the hip capsule or whatever it is. Okay, so that's how that works. So it's mixed, and then when it gets to certain points, it will then branch off into the different nerves. Cool. The connective tissue itself around a nerve is very similar to muscle structure. So if you remember back to if you've done your level 2, level 3 course, remember it's called mycium or mesium. You might have heard it called, where you had the whole muscle belly, and then you've got bundles of muscles, and then those bundles of muscle fibers then come down to those individual muscle fibers. It's exactly the same in a nerve. Okay, so we've got the spinal nerve here, we've got this epineurium, which is the same as the epimysium, which surrounds the whole muscle. Okay, so this is imagine that was the muscle belly, this is the spinal nerve belly. Okay, even though it doesn't go bulbous, it's the same diameter, but this will be the main part of it. And then these would be your fascicles in your muscle, and they're exactly the same name in the nerve. Okay, so it's a bundle of neurons, is a fascicle. And these all, so that one there, that one there, that one there, these are all bundles of nerve fibers that are then all wrapped together in the epineurium, which keeps everything together. And that is an extension of your dura, which is what we saw last week. Okay, so you saw as it coming out of the spinal cord and it wraps around the spinal nerves, that's then continuous all the way down to wherever that nerve is going to go. Yeah, and this is why things like neurodynamics exercises, tests, why they do what they do. Okay, because we're detecting the sensation in the nerve itself. Okay, so the nerve has its own nerve so that it can detect what's going on with it and whether the nerve is happy or not. So that's why when you move your ankle, you might be able to feel some weird discomfort in your mid back because your spinal cord is connected to your sciatic nerve via connective tissue and neurologically as well. Okay, really, really fascinating. This is why trying to figure out why someone has discomfort and pin it on a structure is really, really difficult. Really difficult to do. Okay. So we're wrapping around these fascicles. We've got perineurium, and this would be perimysium in a muscle. And then we've got these little uh, the final nerves, so the neurons themselves, with the axon in the middle and the myelin sheath around it, and then they are wrapped in endoneurium, which is in the muscle endomysium. Okay, so it's exactly the same kind of structure. So everything all bundled together, and obviously the bigger the nerve, the more fascicles, and then they'll go off and distribute into different areas. Okay, cool. Where are we? Last bit, and then we're done. So we're doing the lumbar plexus. Get your pipe cleaners ready for next week. Okay. I'm just going to explain these branches, and then we'll finish it there. I realise this has been a pretty heavy session, so it might be one that you need to watch back again and just kind of get your head around. But yeah, happy to answer any questions after you've watched it. So Rami, we've heard of these before. These are branches. Okay, so that's what Rami means. So the branches, almost as soon as the spinal nerve passes through the intervertebral foramen, so the bit out the side of the spinal column, it starts to split into branches. Okay, and if you can see here, you'll be able to see this little branch here, that little branch there, and then that one wrapping around there, and then there's another one that kind of goes back on itself as well. Okay, so the posterior branch, the posterior ramus, supplies the deep muscles of the back and the posterior skin. And we saw this last week. If I just go back to these videos, let's have a look at that one. So it's this one here. Let me just show you that. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so there's your facet joint. So we saw this video last week, but it ties in nicely to this. And there's your dorsal roots. Okay, so these are all the rootlets coming off. There's your dorsal root. There's the anterior rootlets, and there'll be an anterior root just there. Just press play again. There we go. So there's the anterior one. There's the posterior one, and there's the dura, which forms the connective tissue then around the nerve. Okay, so that epineurium all the way down. You can see it there. Okay, so this is the dorsal root ganglion, the bunch of nerves, and then this is it as it comes out of the intervertebral foramen. Now, depending on where it is, there may be a little branch of nerves that comes out to the front, but there's this one in this particular area where it comes out to the back. So there's your posterior rami, just there. That's the anterior, just there. Sometimes there's one that comes off of the front, and that'll be around the thoracic area. Okay, so that's what we're looking at when we look at this. So that's the main nerve coming out there. There's the posterior rami coming around the back, and this picture is really good because you can see the muscles. So this goes to the muscles, and it will also innervate the skin, so the sensation on your back. Okay, so where your spinous processes are here, all of your sensation will come from there. Okay, so the posterior ramus comes out there. Okay, anterior or ventral ramus, muscles in the skin of the limbs, the lateral and anterior of the body. So that's that one. That's the main one, okay, that comes out there. And those are the main ones that we usually see, okay? And when we look at the lumbar plexus, those will be the ones that we'll be focused on. You've got this little branch here, which in the thoracics will be the sympathetic nervous system, sympathetic trunk. We'll look at that another day. And then we've got a meningeal branch. So this re-enters the vertebral canal and supplies the vertebra, the vertebral ligament, the blood vessels, and the meninges. And you can just about make it out on this video. So there's a nerve that kind of comes back in on itself to control all of the environment around the spinal cord. Okay, so it kind of feeds in on itself as well. Crazy stuff. Okay, told you it's heavy. Sorry guys, it had to be done. I'm afraid it's a bit of tough love today. So yeah, really important session to get your head around where we're going. Because when we start to, I'm going to start to drop in a little bit on reflex testing and stuff like that. So you need to know those different tracts. You need to know that when you get sensation, there's all this interaction going on with information going up those different tracks to let the brain know what's going on as you get a reflex arc. Okay, so that's really important as well. Because I'll show you some videos of when it all goes wrong, and you'll be able to work out why it's going wrong. Right? So if you ever see it, then you'll be like, okay, that might be that. Yeah. So hopefully that will make sense. You're very welcome, Becky. No problem. Yeah. Like I say, sorry, it's a bit of a heavy one today. But yeah, I will be back next Monday, 10 o'clock. Any questions about today's session, drop them in the group. Happy to answer them. And yeah, I'll see you next week.